We are so excited to have you back on the podcast. I know that people got so much out of the first interview we had with you. Friendship is actually one of our most requested topics. I feel like women in our community are just going through it. So we're really excited to dive in today. We thought we would start by asking you about the different attachment styles in friendship. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, absolutely. So, your attachment style is a template you have about how people relate to you based on your early familial relationships. And so, you might have an anxious attachment where you tend to think, people abandon me, my friends secretly don't like me. You tend to move really fast in relationships to prove to you that people won't abandon you. You might overshare, again, to test whether people will still be around. You are putting a lot of effort, but you tend to see rejection where it's not there, and that ultimately harms your relationship. So the effort isn't playing out. You might say things like, my friendships are all so fragile. But then you have avoidantly attached people. And these avoidantly
Mm.
attached people, they don't really like getting close to people. They see intimacy as a threat because in their childhood, they experience like food, shelter, but emotional neglect. So never vulnerable. They see vulnerability as really pathetic. People don't feel like they really know them. They don't put a lot of effort. They take feedback really negatively because they have a lot of shame actually around any sort of feeling shame around their sense of self, but they protect themselves from like that by acting better and stronger than everyone. Like they don't need anyone and they can be completely self sufficient. So they tend to have fewer friends, not put a lot of effort into friends. And if they have friends, the friends don't feel that close to them. And then you have securely attached people who had sort of like good enough parents who were there for them and tried to meet their needs emotionally, understood that they were kids, but they had their own sense of reality and their own needs, and they were more listened to and heard. And those secure people, I call them super friends. Research finds they're more likely to initiate friendships, better at showing forgiveness towards other people in conflict and not escalating it, staying regulated. They are vulnerable, but if someone doesn't reciprocate, the anxious person will escalate vulnerability and the secure person will pull back because they're discerning of the people that they express themselves to. They're more affectionate friends. They are putting effort into their friendship and they're getting rewarded for it.
Oh my gosh, I like that. Do you know what you are?
Well, I
Uh,
would this is my next book.
Yeah.
My next book is called Secure-ish because I actually advocate
Okay.
that nobody's perfectly secure. And if we
Yeah.
think of ourselves that way, we alienate the parts of ourselves that aren't. And those parts need our care and love, the parts of us that are still anxious and avoidant.
Yeah, because I can see so many of my friendships that feel secure, but if I were to lean one way, it would be anxious. Like, as you're listing them
Hmm.
out, I'm like, yes, especially if I'm in a vulnerable spot or if I'm
Hmm.
feeling like I'm taking things personally or I'm very, very tired, very, very hungry. I feel like that's when the anxious style definitely pops up.
Absolutely.
I feel that. I'm also interested if somebody does lean one way or the other, do they tend to go towards people with the same attachment style or opposite? Have you seen any
Yeah.
correlation there?
Yeah. Well, first, I just wanted to caveat attachment theory by saying that our attachment styles do change over time. You're not doomed, but it's helpful to understand what your attachment style
Yeah.
is so you don't continue to, for example, as an anxious person, move really quickly in relationships that tend to blow up, or as an avoidant person, assume that everyone's out to get you or harm you, or you can't trust anyone. So you could figure out the people that you can actually trust. So knowing our attachment style allows us to not to succumb to some of its vulnerabilities. But when it comes to connection, so anxious people have really learned I have to earn love, and they are attracted to people that make them earn it. So if you give them love freely, they're kind of like, I don't know, I don't trust this, like I want to earn your love. So they tend to be attracted to people that are avoidant. And because avoidantly attached people, they're not always fair relationship partners. If there's a problem, they really blame everyone else. They have
Mm.
trouble seeing their own role. They don't really reciprocate that much. And so secure people tend to be like, I don't know if I want to deal with someone who like every time I have a need, they call me like too sensitive or make me feel bad about myself. But anxious people, that actually fits what they think about themselves. So there tends to be this sort of homeostasis of some sorts between the anxious and avoidant types, whereas secure people tend to befriend more secure people. And this is my biggest struggle when it comes to connection is that wow, it's so much easier for people that are already connected to keep connecting well, and people that have struggled with connection that has triggered a set of assumptions about the world and behaviors that then continue to make connection hard.
Well, that's why I liked your caveat of this really is probably more on a continuum.
Mhm.
than it is like you are anxious forever and good luck with that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and I also think once we go into a stress state, like Abby was talking about, like there'll be days where she tells me, she'll say, I'm vulnerable today.
Oh, I love
I
that.
can't really handle feedback and I feel like I'm going to cry. And I
Mm.
can hear that and respect that and understand her state. So I wanted to mention that because I feel like sometimes when we're in that stress state, we might go closer to anxious or avoidant
Mhm.
than we actually usually are.
Yeah, and I love the idea of just voicing that and expressing what you need, right? And I love that, Abby, you do that so directly because when we're not vulnerable in that way, we tend to be harmful to other people, right? Like what
Mm,
could have
mhm.
happened is, Abby, you got feedback on that day and you were like, "What are you talking about?" You could have gone into like a defensive spiral, right? But you were able to express your need. And so, I think avoidant people too, like struggling to say, I need relationships to move really slowly because they feel quite threatening to me. And I actually think that's one way we move towards secure is we stop trying to pretend we're something else and we are instead vulnerable with trustworthy people about what some of our difficulties, our struggles are. And then if they're the right people, they can actually attune to that. And then now we're receiving relationship feedback that is counter to the assumptions of our attachment style. And that is sort of like how the healing process begins.
Friendship is a really interesting subject when I'm just thinking about it, listening to you, because there are just different phases of our life. And I think that's why our listeners, who a lot of them are new mothers or they have, school age children, they're very busy, like they've been through a lot. And so, one question that comes to mind for them is they wanted to know what if your friend needs more from you than you can currently give her? You feel
Yeah.
like you really care about her. It's not that you don't want to be there. It's just that you do have, a plate full of demands and the friendship is taking up more of the plate than you can give.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, first, empathy to
Yeah.
mothers out there who are so overwhelmed and want to show up, but it feels not humanly possible, and you're spread so thin. So I don't, first, not going into a place of self blame and starting from a place of compassion, I think is really important. And then the second thing I'll say is that when it comes to saying no to our friends, it's often not saying no that harms the friendship as much as it is how we say no. Right. And so it's one thing to say, you are completely overwhelming me. Like, you need to step back and find some way to take care of your problems on your own. And it's another thing to say, man, like, I really wish I could be there for you. I really do. And like, this is what's going on in my life, like every day it's so many hours with the kids. And so, like, I know that there's this form of support I can offer you that may not be exactly like fulfilling all of your needs, but I just want to be really transparent with you because I love you and I don't want to keep letting you down. And that is like almost the same thing, but one is said lovingly and considering the other person,
Yeah.
and the other is said not considering the other person. And so I'll say no and say no kindly.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too in friendship because when you're really close to someone, you really are their sounding board. And so Abby and I have found over the years with each other and with other people that sometimes you're hearing the same problem like over and over and over and over and over. And
Hmm.
some people verbally process things and we totally hold space for that. But there can also be a point in friendship where you're like, okay, I know that this is so hard and that you've really thought through like all of your options. I'm trying to get at like, how do we say, like, I can't be the person that hears about this problem anymore? Or
Yeah.
some of us are very solution oriented. So it's like, it's not even that we don't want to be supportive, it's that we want to now move into the solution phase of things.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah. If it feels like I'm getting so overwhelmed by hearing about this problem repeatedly that I don't, often I think, there is this way that friendships do push us to sometimes be in periods of discomfort or inconvenience when it means a lot to the other person. But we know that we're
Mhm.
past that point when we feel like withdrawing from the other person, right? And so if you're at the point where you're like, I just don't want to hang out with them because I don't want to hear about this again, it's a lot kinder to address it than it is to just back away. Because then you at least give the other person a chance to stay in your life and continue that level of closeness. And that's how I feel in general about conflict, especially with friendship. We tend to just withdraw and pull away because we think often if I bring this up, the other person will get mad or abandon me or the friendship will end. But one way you're really guaranteeing that it'll end and the other person is going to be hurt is when you just withdraw and they don't know what's going on. So I would say Harriet Lerner, she's another psychologist. She actually has a really good script for this, which is like, I'm so sorry you're hurt. I know we've talked about this a bunch. And I am kind of missing the fullness of our relationship. I've noticed we focus on this so much and we haven't had X, Y, Z together. We haven't been doing our movie nights. We haven't been chit-chatting about the other things happening in our life. And so I want to sort of return to that. And I also don't want to leave you hanging on still needing support in that way. Like, is there someone else that we can bring in to make sure that you can get support in this way, in that way?
I love the examples you give because just being on the receiving end of them,
I
I know this
know.
is a
That's like,
podcast, but
yeah.
like the way that you're saying things, you're just proving that there is a way to be very kind when you're being honest.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, especially right now, our society can miss the mark on that.
Yeah, I think it is really about it actually is kind to set a boundary because it
Yeah.
allows you to stay in relationship. And I think reflecting on what will me setting this boundary or not being able to fill this need, what does that bring our relationship? And to say, I want more fullness. I want us to be able to have more range in what we talk about. I want to offer help that's more sustainable for you. And I don't know if we can continue to do that if we're moving at this pace, right? That there is always a gain that comes with loss and being able to actually point out and emphasize that gain that's coming too.
Can I share a quick story about how I didn't follow your instructions and how it
Sure.
actually turned out?
Absolutely. We would
Sure.
love it.
My old coworkers, there was a group of us that we were all surface level. We were all different stages of life. One was way younger, two were way older. And we didn't really talk about much. Like, how's the weather? How's the weekend? And we'd go back to our desks. What are you having for lunch? Do you want to go for a walk? Would never actually do it. And then all of a sudden we started venting to each other and complaining to each other about our partners, about our jobs, about, the goals that we had that we weren't hitting. And our relationship literally turned into just an event session.
Mhm.
And as somebody who doesn't do that very much, it was kind of hard for me to keep up right away. And then I started feeling awful in it. Like, oh, wait, hold on. I don't want to keep on complaining. I don't have anything else to complain about. They had unlimited things to complain about. And it got to the point where I'm like, I can't do this anymore, but
Mhm.
I'm part of this small group. They're my only friends at work. I don't want to leave this group because
Mm.
they are my friends. And so I told them for Lent that I gave up complaining. And that's how avoidant I was with this because I just wanted to walk away from the situation. I said, I actually gave it up for Lent. It's 6 weeks. I'll be back in the conversation thinking that was going to solve everything. All that it did was it made the group a group of 3 instead of a group of 4. And I never got to hang out with them for that entire time. So I think that saying something like, I would like some more fullness in this relationship. Let's go back to, not back to where we were because it was just service level, but what else can we talk about would have
Yeah.
probably been the better option.
Very creative way to
I-
get out of the problem, though. I have to give you props for
It
thinking
did
of
work.
that.
I will say it did work, you guys. I didn't have any friends for about 6 weeks, so that was cool. Yeah.
One thing we hear when we do these types of episodes is people think that friendship comes really easy to Abby and I. I think because we have a podcast, we're talking all the time. They think we're outgoing and they think it's easy for you guys to say. It's easy for you. It's not easy for me. I would like to share that when my kids were really little, friendship was actually really pretty hard for me, especially meeting new friends. I just felt so overwhelmed in my home life that my capacity for new friends was really pretty low. I couldn't even remember what they were saying to me because I always had an eye on this toddler over here and this little kid over here. So it was really hard for me to kind of lean into my community. And I've come so far. Now I have all of these mom friends for each of my 3 boys. I know the moms. I love them. They're such interesting women. It's I almost wish I would have done it earlier. But in my head, friendship felt so overwhelming, especially new friendship.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, going through life with people that are in a similar phase can be really helpful to us. So if women are feeling like I felt and they just feel overwhelmed with life in general, can you give us a little coaching advice on A, why friendship is still important? And then B, if they feel like, you know what, I'm not outgoing. How am I gonna meet these mom friends? What would you say are some good ways to try to start to expand your circle?
Well, I think starting with a lot of compassion for yourself. So, Amy, that sounds really hard to have friends when you feel like you can't even focus on anything at all and you're so overwhelmed. Because I think if you start with man, I can't keep up, I'm not good enough, it's really hard to make friends from that place because to make friends, I say assume people like you. That's one of my sort of biggest tips for making friends. And so starting with compassion that, yeah, the transition to motherhood, there's a lot of parts of your previous identity that are going to feel challenged. But when it comes to the value of friends, to create a new identity, one of the ways we create that identity is having other people that share that identity and affirm that identity in us. And so feeling that people know and understand you as a mom, feeling like that's an identity that you can take on that feels good for you, that is going to involve being in community with other people who see that in you. And the other thing is the one thing that consistently predicts our ability to get through challenging experiences is connection. That's what we see in the research. It's the number one thing. But of course, when you're in a compromised period, connection is really hard because one thing that connection involves, especially making new friends, is taking risks. Hey, I'd love to hang out with someone that you don't necessarily know if they want to hang out with you. And when you're in a challenging time, risks, if the risk doesn't go right, it feels so much more devastating. And so there's different ways to approach friendship depending on if you're in a challenging time, like starting to, as your life as a new mom or not, which I say when you're in a more challenging time, you want to lean and rely on those more established friendships, maybe spend more time with people that you already know and already feel comfortable with, seeing them more often, and importantly, being vulnerable with them. Like, hey, I am struggling here. This has been hard for me, not trying to be perfect and polished because we tend to think vulnerability will make us seem weak, but research finds that people like people that are vulnerable more. They feel closer to them. They're not we think we're evaluated more negatively than we actually are when we're vulnerable. So, vulnerability can really be a portal to intimacy if we express that vulnerability. And so, those are some of the things that I would say to new moms that are looking to navigate new friendships. And also just remembering that we have seasons where friendship is really at the center of our lives and seasons where other things are at the center of our lives. And that also doesn't mean that that'll last forever, right? Like it sounds like Amy, you now feel, and if I'm sure if you knew at the time where you felt like, oh, I wish I had closer people in my life, that there would be a time when that would happen again for you, it would be a lot easier to get through that.
I hear in that answer is depth. So instead of having quantity and focusing on more friendships, it's focusing on the same ones, but just adding depth to it, which can feel like more friendship. You can
Hmm.
feel more connected, more engaged, closer. The connection can feel higher, even if it's with the same group of people or even a smaller group of people, but just more of them. And especially with our listeners being moms mostly, it's not always just one kid. It's one
Yeah.
kid, and then that kid becomes a toddler that becomes a grade schooler, but then you might have another kid along the way. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, we're starting all over again. We're starting all over again. When does the
Yeah.
deepness get to come? When does the
Mm-hmm.
depth get to come? When does the quantity get to come?
Mm-hmm.
But leaning into those current friendships, I think that's a really, really good idea for the people who are listening right now. So if you are, that's a really good point. And just rewind again, listen to that answer, because I think that we all wish we would have had that one back when we were in that stage. It is also interesting right now because Amy and I have grade school kids, and you can meet so many more people because of the kids. So where you go from being very lonely and in a stage where you are bound to nap times and, early bedtimes, and your body is being used and you're so tired, it all of a sudden gets transitioned into you're out more because the kids are in sports or at birthday parties. And so it's a really cool transition to be able to see that and to be able to feel that. So I have a question about somebody who might love their friendship. So let's say it's these two people. They love the friend that they have, but they're noticing that that person is starting to feel more jealous of them, maybe
Mm-hmm.
getting competitive. They really value this relationship. They want the depth. They want to continue it. What advice would you have for that woman to keep the friendship alive while the other person might have that jealous or competitive vibe in them?
Yeah. Well, I love to make assumptions and they tend to hurt my relationships. So I always try to remind myself to start with curiosity, right? And so I would point to the behavior that made you feel like there was a competitive vibe or a jealous vibe, or and then just say like, I kind of just want to understand where you're coming from because I didn't want to misinterpret anything, right? Like, hey, it kind of feels like every time I talk about like my kid's success, like you bring up something else that your kid has done. And I kind of want to understand where you're coming from because I don't want to assume like there's competition if there's not. So I just kind of wanted to check in, right? And so give them a chance to understand where they're coming from, but then you don't attack them and you might be able to help them recognize a pattern that they haven't even recognized because people aren't necessarily conscious of I feel insecure when they start acting out jealously and competitively. And so you're giving them that gift of self-awareness, and then you can just state what your need is going forward. Like, okay, like in the future, I just want there to be room for us to celebrate each other's wins without starting to compare them, or for one person to bring up to start shifting the focus back on them. Like, that would be really important to me. How would that be for you? And so that you can offer that and ask for that moving forward.
There's so much with intention with it too. Like, the person might not be intending it, but you're taking it in a different way, or
Mhm.
it just is how it feels. And having that conversation, the person, like you said, the gift of self-awareness of, this is how it feels. Like, you might
Yep.
not intend it that way, but this is how it feels in that situation. And
Yep.
it could give them, because maybe they're doing it with other friendships too.
That's true. Exactly. And the other thing that I want to say, because I am for bringing up conflict so that there's a chance to work through things, but it doesn't always go well. It's like just like anything in friendship, it's high risk, just like vulnerability, just like putting yourself out there. And I get sometimes when Platonic first came out, there are people reaching out to me saying, I did the thing. I brought up the issue. My friend was defensive and reactive, and now our friendship isn't going well. And I am not here to say that every time you bring some up, they're going to be loving and because they're on their own journey, right? But the
Mhm.
thing is, just because they reacted negatively doesn't mean you were wrong. Just because it triggered their stuff doesn't mean that you're wrong to stand up for what you need and what you value. Like, as long as you're doing it in a kind, caring way. And I think it's just important to not generalize. I think, sometimes if someone never brings up conflicts, like anxiously attached people who, again, fear abandonment, so they tend to not bring it up, and they bring it up once and it doesn't go well, and they're sort of like, never again. Never again will I knew it was gonna go back. I knew they were gonna abandon me. All those scripts come back into play. And so maintaining nuance and also recognizing that the value of this action isn't determined by its outcome. The value is determined by me doing things that are aligned with like myself and what I need in this relationship in ways that also considerate of the other person. And that generally conflict does go better than we think. I mean, not always, but what research finds that having open empathic conflict is linked to more intimacy and closeness in our relationships.
I have to agree because it's like otherwise that thing that bothered you enough that you really wanted to have a grown-up conversation about it, even if that conversation didn't go well, you'd be back in the place where it was bothering you if you never brought it up.
Mhm.
So
Exactly.
it is just that it's just that way of thinking of like, okay, I'm still proud of myself that I put that on the table and I was vulnerable with them.
Yeah, you were a friend to yourself, even if
Yeah.
they couldn't be a friend to you in that moment.
Absolutely. You alluded to this a little bit earlier, but we're really curious. We've heard from our listeners, we've experienced it ourselves. Like sometimes there's a conflict or something that happens in a friendship, and it really just feels like, it might be that it's not working out anymore.
Yeah.
And there's really multiple ways to go about it. I think a lot of people nowadays are kind of just doing the fade out. Like they
Yeah.
just kind of let it fizzle. Like they don't bring up the thing that's really bothering them. They just pull back. And then of course, you could also name it and say like here's what I'm really struggling with in our friendship and why I don't feel like it's going the way that I want it to go.
Yeah.
Do you tend towards one of those? Like, do you feel like it is better to at least have the conversation, or is there ever a time that you do approve on the record fading out?
Approve of fade out if it's both parties fading out. What I don't approve of a fade out is when one person is consistently reaching out and you're being too busy or you're kind of just stop responding. Like that sort of ghosting behavior, what it does is it triggers a sense of ambiguous loss. And that's when people feel like a loss that they have no
Mhm.
closure from. And you put a lot of pain on the other person, right? Like you weren't willing to face the discomfort of that conversation. And now that other person's facing double discomfort because they're still thinking about it and they're ruminating about it and they're wondering what happened. And so they feel really powerless because they don't even know what's happening. And so if the other person is still showing engagement and investment with you, um, it is kinder to tell them than it is to just fade out as hard as it is.
Okay, and this is also something, I mean, we're almost to 40 here over here on the Herself podcast. Over time there are just friendships that do end. And I've heard this a lot recently of like we don't really give space for people to grieve friendships.
Yes.
Like of course if a romantic relationship ends, we all understand that. We're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That's so hard." But when a friendship ends, I almost feel like it feels like more of I don't know if people just think it's more of a choice or whatever it is, but I just wanted to ask you like how do you recommend people kind of process and grieve friendships, whether it was their choice to end it or the other person's?
Well, the first thing I want to say is it's really normal for friendships to end. And I think part of what makes it so hard is you feel so isolated, or you must have done something real wrong if you ended a friendship. But every 7 years, we lose about half our friends. Most of those are just because we fall out of touch. But sometimes it is because there's just like some sort of incompatibility between us. So you're not uniquely bad or wrong because the friendship didn't work out. That's kind of part of life, that we grow and we change, and we don't always change with each other. And the
Yeah.
more that we resist change, the more in pain we are in. So I just want to say, like, it's really normal. One of the reasons friendship loss hurts so much is because it tends to trigger something called disenfranchised grief. Now, that happens when you'd feel like you don't have permission to grieve because other people don't see it as a valid loss. So, for example, people that lose a pet or go through a miscarriage or lose a friendship tend to experience this disenfranchised grief where because other people don't validate the loss to the depths that it's being experienced, they don't validate it within themselves. And so it tends to be really hard. So I also want to say, if it's affecting you a lot and has hurt you a lot, and I hear people say all the time, it hurt more than my divorce, that's okay. The reason why grief gets more complicated and harmful is because we don't think that we have the right to it. So, first, just like permission
Mm.
to be as sad as you need to be. A few things can help when it comes to grieving, talking to other people about it. If nobody knows that you're losing this friendship, if you haven't confided in anyone, your grief process is going to be a lot worse. Three is making meaning. And so that might look like writing down three things you really got out of the friendship, because we don't want to have the narrative that, like, that was all a waste because that was years of your life. We don't want to look at our lives as a waste. So I might write down three things I really got out of the friendship, three things this breakup tells me about what I need in the future for a healthier relationship. And I think what that second part does is it also prevents us from doing something that we tend to do when we have a really harmful experience, which is generalizing and being like, "Hi, everybody's going to harm me, everyone's going to leave me, everyone's going to abandon me," particularly when it reflects your attachment script. You can't trust anyone if you're avoidant. I should never really get close to people. They're going to let me down at the end of the day. And so when you clarify, this is what this reveals about what I need in the future, or the types of people that I want to connect with in the future, it reminds you that it's not that because this didn't work out, it'll never work out. There are relationships where that will be easier for me to connect as I currently am. And these are what some of those will look like.
Is there a time frame for doing those things? Like, is it ever too late to grieve or to write them down, to go through those exercises?
No, if it's still affecting you, you're still grieving. If you're still thinking about it, you're still grieving. And it takes as long as it takes. And the more we try to think, I should be over this, I shouldn't be thinking about this anymore, the more we tend to think about it. In psychology, it's called rebound effects. I tell you not to think of a white polar bear, you're thinking about the white polar bear because your brain is like, are you thinking about it? Are you thinking about it? So all you can do is have compassion for it's like just like when you like fall and you have a cut, you can't be like, hey, cut, heal faster. Like that's sort of like how our psychology works too. Like you just have to feel the feelings, be sad, and not make yourself feel bad for it taking as long as it takes.
Well, and even stats like every 7 years, you lose 50% of your friendships. It normalizes it, but it doesn't make it any easier. Like every single one of those friendships that you're losing, some mean so much. Some might be more surface level, but some can feel so deep. And just because it's normal for that to happen, other people are going through it, doesn't make it any less hard for that person going through it.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
I've
I
heard.
do think we really generalize too. Like,
Mhm.
if the first mom you go up to at the playground is not warm to you, you're like,
Yeah.
see, like, I don't, why should I take the time to try to like, go up to someone? Like it didn't work,
Yeah.
like you said, I feel like we're millennials moms, like we just really have a tendency. I've written off entire professions before.
Whole
I
neighborhood.
can't be friends with other influencers. They get so competitive, So that was good for me to hear.
Yeah, I think
We're always learning. We do say that we're the podcast, but we're always learning. 6 years in, and we're still learning with every guest and every conversation we have.
I love that. I was just going to say also, I think stressful experiences tend to take over our screen of reality, and we miss all the things that are going right. And so this one friendship went wrong. That's all I'm thinking about, all I consumed about. But you have so many other friends and such a big life. Like, don't forget that. Don't forget all the things that are happening
Mhm.
outside of the thing that's painful or stressing you out.
Oh, that was so good to hear because we're talking to an audience that is so busy. They are low on energy. And so it is easier to say, oh, this friendship didn't go well or this isn't going well. I'm just not going to put my energy into that right now. But
Mhm.
there is so much goodness in so many of these relationships and there's so much depth and good feelings. So
Mhm.
absolutely.
Mhm.
I want to touch on an Instagram post that you had, the 3 ways you're unknowingly harming your relationships. Can you break these down and let our listeners know more about these things that they may be doing?
Yeah, some of these I feel like are calling myself out too. Like emotional asymmetry is the first one, which is when other people are vulnerable and you're not vulnerable back. For me, this is my good listeners. I'm calling out my good listeners because I identify as a good listener, but I've realized in some ways it's a crutch to not be as exposed. I'm just listening to you and you're really happy about it. I don't have to share my own experience or reality. So, vulnerability is more powerful and impactful and brings us together even more when we are vulnerable too. And so, if someone else is being vulnerable with you, maybe take the risk to offer that back to them. The second one is not asking for support. A lot of us are convinced that when we ask for support, we burden people, we overwhelm them. People might see us as weak. But ironically, if someone else asks us for the very same form of support, we might be like, oh my God, they chose me. I'm important enough for them to want help from me. Or it's just like, I really love this person. I really appreciate the opportunity to show them that I love them. And research finds that the more we ask for support, the more intimacy we have in our friendship. So if you're in need of support, asking people for it. And the third one is egocentric bias. And that is really thinking about how this person has harmed me or what these friends are doing for me and not thinking about what am I doing for them. And I hear this a lot of times with making friends. People are like, nobody's reaching out to me. They're so cliquey, right? And nobody's like, making me feel like I belong. But what if you want to belong, you have to make other people feel like they belong. And if you're not reaching out and saying hello and expressing curiosity, asking people about themselves, then you're holding people to a higher standard than you're holding yourself to. And so, are you doing the things that you're wishing that people do for you? Flip it around, whatever you're asking for out of your social network secretly and resentfully. Are you also giving that to your social network? Because according to reciprocity theory, the more we give something, the more likely we are to get it back from people.
One thing that came to mind, I just saw it on TikTok. I was telling Abby about it. I saw this TikTok and I think it was a podcast, and they were talking about how sometimes in friendship, we get in our friend groups and it's a beautiful thing. It's like it feels really safe. These are the people we really know, but it can actually really hold us back in some ways too.
Mm.
Because if we're closed off to like anyone else coming in the group or me having friends outside of the group, you don't have that expansion of meeting new people.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get your thoughts on that because I do think, sometimes females can really group up and
Yeah.
like that's the people that they mostly roll with. And it doesn't feel like there's always an opportunity to like break into their little group.
Yeah, yeah. We actually tend to see this as we age too. People in their
Mm.
20s tend to be really open to new friends. And then as we get older, we tend to have fewer higher quality connections and kind of cut off those more fringe friends that were more like acquaintances. And the reason is that in our 20s, we are looking to expand our sense of identity. We are looking to figure out who we are. Different people give us access to new experiences. As we get older, we think about, like, I have this much time left, or I have this much time at all. I really want to spend it with that time with people that I feel really close to. So I would say I think it's smart to not just do something that's rote and easy, but instead the way you navigate friendship should be a reflection of where you're at with your life currently. And so if you're like, my life is boring and tedious and I could use something new, that is the time to go out there and meet new people, make new friends, right? If you're like, man, I'm really overwhelmed or life is really hard or it's not a time it doesn't feel like a time for me to put myself out there. That's a time to kind of move towards the established friendships that don't make you feel like you have to put yourself out there as much.
What would you say for the person that is feeling overwhelmed, but she is so lonely? Is there one that comes first in that situation?
This is such a good question because here's the thing about loneliness, the science of loneliness. We think of loneliness as just a feeling, like I don't have the social connection I need. But loneliness actually changes how we perceive everything around us. We see people as more threatening. We think they're rejecting us when they're not. We feel more hostile towards them, more aggressive towards them. You might look at your old friends and think about all the ways they don't show up for you rather than the ways that they do. You might think if I reach out to anyone, they're not going to want to hear from me. I'm going to be a burden. Everyone has their own friends. Like you just get really cynical. And you can think about this from an evolutionary lens. If you're lonely, you are separated from your tribe, all alone, you have to be really attuned to signs of danger. And so that's really what tends to happen to us when we feel lonely. Actually, social connection gets really hard because we see everyone as threatening. And in fact, loneliness is related to withdrawing more because as much as you want connection, you think that everyone is going to reject you and harm you. So I think a good move when you're lonely is like, what is the lowest hanging fruit right now? Because connection is hard. And the other thing is, we're not statically lonely. There's often times throughout the week when we're more lonely and less lonely. So I say for people that are lonely on the weekends because they're not at work, can you reach out to someone to hang out with during the week before you get to that lonely period? Because then you're going to feel less afraid of taking that risk. And your low hanging fruit might be reconnecting with someone that you already have a friendship with.
Mm.
It might be someone you've already built a relationship with at work and you just ask them to have lunch together or coffee together, for example. Like the things that are a little less scary, or just interacting more with those established friendships. And once you're not lonely, right, there are things I recommend, like joining a group that meets repeatedly over time, because the more familiar we are to each other, the more we tend to like each other more. Overcoming covert avoidance, which is our tend to show up physically, but check out mentally, right? We're on our phone, we're in the corner at a social event, but you actually have to introduce yourself to people, say hi, show it, be engaged with other people. And so it's really about knowing, I guess, where you're at, what your capacity is. It's lower when you're lonely. And what is an attainable way that you can connect given your current state?
I love that answer. I
Oh,
felt like it just really gave a good perspective of like, sometimes it's just one step forward. Like
yeah.
you don't have to, everything doesn't have to change if you're feeling like friendship is a place that you want to work on. Also, I was going to say the reach back out. Like if you haven't talked to your friend in a long time, that is usually very warmly received. I
Mhm.
think we get in our heads like it's too far gone or something. And like anytime I reach out to a college friend that I haven't seen in years, it's like we have a great conversation.
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Marisa Franco, we're obsessed with your work. You're so good at what you do. Please let our listeners know where they can find more of you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was really a pleasure. My niece read my book, Platonic: How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends, which you can find anywhere. And she said, for friendship to happen, someone has to be brave. So be brave. You can also find me on Instagram
Mm.
at Dr. Marisa G. Franco. That's DrMarisa GFranco. And on my website, drmarisagfranco.com, you can take a quiz that assesses your strengths and weaknesses as a friend, or reach out for speaking events on how to make friends or how to find belonging at work. Thank you.
Well, we love having you on. And this is also a reminder that it's never too late to make a really good friend. I mean, Amy and I, we started this podcast 6 years ago. And before that, we were Facebook friends and text message friends, turned Voxer friends, turned
Beautiful.
podcast hosts. And now we own a cabin together. We spend almost every single day together. And so you can find deep friendships at any stage of life. So it's just a reminder that it's never too late and you can find that depth. So thank you again so much for being on.
My pleasure.